are here, so be sure you introduce yourself, to come up to us and introduce yourself if we haven't met you. But anyway, I want to give a shout out too. I was spring breaking and was not at the Whole Foods gathering with Becky, Meredith, and Donna, who I heard they just really brought it on learning to downside. So just want to give a little shout out to them. And I think eventually we'll have some notes.
I'm going to type up my notes, but I wasn't organized enough to do that this week. So. It's only been 2 weeks. So.
We're in for a treat today with Stacy, and in a few minutes I'll have Becky reintroduce her to us because she shared with us earlier, and everybody was so blessed by what she shared. But I was telling Stacy, this was just too appropriate. Well, before I share this, let me just say, Jennifer, you were going to share about at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, at the end, those of you who have been here, we've had the just opportunity for you to write down any prayer requests or ask us to pray with you. So LaVon is going to be doing that, being available for that this week. And so just, I don't know, the office maybe or something like that, just write it in there. If you really want someone to pray with you today, or you just want to fill out our prayer card, feel free to just nab us and do that today.
Thank you so much. And we'll have a few announcements at the end, too, about our session on April 17th. It's going to be very fun. You will not want to miss, and bring your friends, but I'll leave you hanging until the end. But I had to share, I asked my husband, I go, should I tell this story about my parents before we have Stacy? Because we're talking about aging parents today, and I started a tradition. My parents live in Houston. They're 83 and 85, and some of my family lives there, my siblings. So my contribution is I'm doing this thing, what we're calling the Tour de Texas with my parents. And they are fulfilling their literal bucket list, okay? And they are like that my dad, who was a bank examiner back in the day, wants to go see all his friends around these little towns around Texas. So it's pretty adorable. So this last trip took us to Cleburne, Texas, and to Dallas. But the thing that was so comical about it was just 2 weeks ago after spring break, is that my mom is a caffeine Nazi. Like, she is like, she'll be like, Bob, are you getting near the caffeine? Because he was in ER last year because he had 5 cups of coffee and ended up, being put in the ER. So we would stop at convenience stores, and with aging parents, stopping at convenience stores takes a while, right? And we were at one 7-Eleven for about 45 minutes, I think. And my dad would be like, Carol, can you get me a little Diet Coke? And I'd be like, Dad, and I'm such an enabler. I'd get a cup and I'd pour some in. So I'd be like, yeah. So, but the culmination of the caffeine Nazi thing happened on our ride back from Dallas, and we stopped at this big, beautiful ranch in Cleburne, Texas, to see a bank examiner. He examined banks with them. They were 25, and they had fine china out and wine glasses. I'm thinking, this is like 11:30 in the morning. I'm like, sign me up, baby. But anyway, and so at the end we had this, fish and this wonderful lunch. And the lady who worked there said, would y'all like some coffee? I thought, oh no. Here comes Joan. And so my mom's like, Bob? And so my dad's like, just 1 cup. So then he took a sip. She said, well, at least let me have a sip. So she handed it to him. He handed it to her, and she got her water and poured it in it. And it's like, don't they come full circle? Couldn't you see one of your grandchildren kind of doing that? And we all started laughing. She sabotaged his coffee. So anyway, I just had to share that for whatever it's worth. But I'm going to let Becky share and introduce Stacy again. So thank you.
Well, we really are blessed to have you here. She graced us several weeks ago with her discussion on in-law issues, and you actually kind of worked right into this wonderful schedule. When I initially had asked her about different topics which she'd like to speak on, and she said I really could speak into in-laws and aging parents. And then as this semester started to unfold, it's like, I wonder if she'd come back and talk about aging parents. So I don't know that you were initially thinking you were going to double dip, but we are so grateful that you're here, and she's very passionate about this subject. I think I'd given those of you who were at LaVon's for her earlier talk, she is highly educated. She has been a pastor all her life. She has a PhD from Oh, is that your master? No, your
Doctorate of Ministry, yeah.
From Princeton.
Aquinas Institute.
Aquinas, and then
A master's from Princeton.
Princeton. Okay. I went to get her bio last night,
Okay.
and it was not on my computer anymore. My email had been recovered, and it didn't have the attachment. And I didn't think at 1 o'clock in the morning you'd want to hear from me. But anyway, she has been married for 38 years, if I remember correctly, to Al, and I always pronounce his last name wrong, Krummenacher.
Krummenacher, yeah.
And he's the director of development.
Those are our kids.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, all
So
our
3
kids.
kids, 2 boys and her daughter on her left, and their wives and her boyfriend. And she's been at Westlake Hills Press for about 5 years, initially as an associate pastor, and then she stepped into the big role of interim senior pastor. And now that we have our permanent senior pastor, who is also a woman, she's serving as our senior associate. And I can already tell what a blessing she has been for Emily Wright, our new pastor, to have a female to mentor her in this big role. And I have just loved watching the dynamics between the two of you, and she's really, really been a blessing for our church. And again, very grateful that she's willing to talk to us. So today it's about aging parents, and she has much to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nope, I wasn't.
It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by saying I am not an expert in some of the topics we're about to talk about. And I'm okay with that because there really are great experts in gerontology and aging and senior living options. Don't you love that phrase? Senior living options, all those things. There are plenty of experts. What I am is a practitioner, right? I have 4 elderly relatives that I'm the primary caregiver for right now at different levels of needing of care. It's one of the reasons I'm not a senior pastor of a large church, because it is time consuming. I also, as a pastor, I walk with families through these issues all the time and have been for 38 years. So there's a difference between a practitioner and an expert. So I'm happy to take questions and we can have discussions, but there are people in this room who probably are more expert about some of the things you want to know than I am. What I want to talk about is for us as women, when these situations arise, and if we are blessed, we will live to have aging parents, right? I mean, it's hard to remember that is a blessing that we have them, right? Then things are going to happen. Issues will arise. The picture at the top of the page I wanted to show you, this was taken just about a month ago at Belmont Village on Bee Cave Road. This is my father-in-law, Don Krummenacher. He's 94 years old. He is my hero in a lot of ways. I've known him for 40 years, but I've been his caregiver now for almost 10. 10 years ago, Mom Krummenacher, who was a little older than he was, had a stroke. They were 87 and 88. They were living in their own home, that home they'd been in for 64 years, taking care of themselves. Really not that well, but they were taking care of themselves, driving, all those kind of things. And she had a massive stroke. And so in the blink of an eye, we moved them from their home and everything they knew to Dallas, Texas, which at the time was where I lived, so that we could watch over them. And the Odyssey began. Right? The Odyssey began of learning the ropes, the legal, medical ropes of being a caregiver of folks. We are at the end of that road to a certain extent with my dad. I call him Dad, with Dad. We've gone through the period of moving them to town and putting them in a really good assisted living facility where they had their own apartment and could still live together as husband and wife, and they could have their own life and they could participate in activities. And there were 2 or 3 years that was great. We were not the power of attorney. We were not with HIPAA regulations. We weren't like having conversations with their doctors. We were simply that supportive, kid who lived in town, who was there maybe once or twice a week. Any of you in that kind of position with your parents at this point? And that's not a bad place to be, right? But it didn't stay that way, because as health conditions continued, right, it became important for us to start taking over financial things, to take over their medical things, and to get them more care. So like many of you, we slid into becoming the power of attorney for all of the banking and all of the, legal things. We slid into, signing all those HIPAA documents, or basically they signed the HIPAA documents so that we could have direct conversations with doctors, things like that. We slid, and I bet some of you have done this too, we slid into that thing where they stopped going anywhere without us, right? Stopped driving, right? And it, as that kind of happens, as many of you know, you have to make adjustments, right, in your schedule. Make adjustments with siblings, right? Make adjustments with your kids, maybe. Make adjustments as you go along. So we'll talk about that. We're in a stage at this point where Dad is in a great assisted living facility where many of his physical needs are being taken care of, but we need to be there 3 to 4 times a week, right? We do the laundry. Why do I do the laundry? Because of course they could. Why do I do the laundry? Because I need to make sure he's actually changing his clothes on a regular basis. So I actually do the laundry. You can learn a lot by doing someone's laundry about how they're doing. And we won't go any further than that. But let's just, so doing the laundry, and it also gives you a good excuse to stop by twice a week. Those are 2 of my visits, to pick up and drop off laundry, because he doesn't want to be hovered over, right? So it's my little way. And then we go over twice more for regularly scheduled visits, because he likes regularly scheduled visits. So the 2 to go and get the laundry and bring it back, or pop in, like, ta-da, I'm here. And the other 2 are scheduled. And so this works. But his little heart is just barely beating, and he is losing a little bit of interest in things. And about a week ago, I took him to his cardiologist, who he really likes because she's a beautiful young woman, okay? My dad, he's not creepy, but he is a man, okay? She's a beautiful young woman. That's right. And we go to the cardiologist, and she says, Mr. Krumenacher, I think you're doing really well. We've done everything we can. Your medicines are where they need to be, so let's keep going. And he looks at her, and he's still very sharp. He looks at her and he says, but there's this one medicine I don't want to take anymore. And if any of you are doing caregiving, you know that blood thinners in older people, there's a real, right? And he was on a blood thinner. And he makes this really eloquent case to her, to his cardiologist. And he says, I really don't want to take this blood thinner anymore. It's too expensive. When I have little trips and falls, I scrape myself up, and it's a mess. And it makes me scared to fall, that I'm going to bleed. I don't want to do it. He did a great job. And she did a great job. She looks at him and she says, Mr. Krumenacher, you know that this blood thinner is really important, because if you don't take it, you might have a stroke. And I kid you not, he looks at her real intently, and he's a precious man. He really is. He takes her hand, which is not like him, but he kind of, because her hand's sitting there, and he goes, I am 94 years old. I really wouldn't mind having a stroke. I don't want to take the medicine. And to her credit, she blinked and she swallowed, and she gave me one look, because she knew I was the medical power of attorney. And she's like, you're okay with this? To her credit, she just looked at me just to check. And I'm, and she says, okay, Mr. Krumenacher, you won't be taking that anymore. We'll just write that off. So I tell you this story for a couple of reasons. One, to tell you that this long road of caregiving, though it has not been easy, it has been a real blessing. It's been a blessing for my husband in particular to be able to be so near his parents. And for those of you poor folks who are not in a situation where you can be near them, you understand what I'm saying. We feel blessed that we have been near them. But we've also learned an awful lot. It is almost as if Dad is teaching almost his final lessons. I don't think he sees it that way because he doesn't think like that. But we are learning so much by watching him, his courage. When Mom died, we were in a Brookdale facility that was a pretty high level of care facility because she needed that. And she'd been gone a week, and he says, okay, I need a new facility. I'm ready to move. I want something where there are not so many old people. That's what he told me. He moved into a new facility, made new friends, joined a bridge group. His courage, his openness, his curiosity have just been beautiful to watch. It's not always like that, I know. But I start by saying that being a caregiver isn't really all about guilt and difficulty and having to manage things. And you guys know that there are moments that are really wonderful that you frankly you have to hang on to. Am I right? That you have to hang on to. So I have 3 simple rules. I'm not an expert, but let me tell you my 3 simple rules, and then you guys can ask questions about it. My first simple rule, and this sounds simple and it is not, is if you, as your parents age, especially if it's clear that you are going to be in a caregiving role for them, honesty is so crucial. And I don't mean just nice honesty. I mean brutal honesty. Honesty with your siblings. I mean, more honesty than you may want to have with your siblings, okay? Honesty with yourself, with the rest of your family, and with your parents. I watched this the first time I watched my husband tell his mother, you're not going to get any better. You can't go home. I mean, he was so brutally honest. It made me cringe. But she looked at him, she blinked, and she said, well, isn't that something? And for the first time got her mind around not going back to her home where she'd lived for 65 years. Brutal honesty about medical procedures. Dad, if they do this procedure and your heart stops on the table, what do you want them to do? None of this nice stuff about, DNRs or whatever. I mean, brutal honesty. Or the conversation, which was the most important honest conversation we ever had with Al's parents, which happened way before a stroke, happened back when they were in their mid-80s, still living in their own home, where my husband sat them down and said, here's the deal. I want you to stay in your house as long as you can. And I'll do anything I can to make, that possible. But the minute you can't handle it, you're going to have to move, at this point, Texas to be with us. As hard as that was, those brutally honest conversations early on can really make a huge difference. And when I say brutally honest, things like, I can't keep running back and forth to St. Louis. We can't do that and keep our jobs. We can't rely on your next door neighbor. They have their own family. Those brutally honest conversations. And you're not just honest once. You have to continue. You don't have to say everything. Honesty doesn't mean that everything has to be shared. But honesty about those things that are really important. Does that make sense to you? I find as a pastor that most families are just not that honest with each other. One sibling is upset with the other because they're not pulling their load and they won't tell them, right? Or parents are feeling a little bit afraid of living alone, but they've got 2 kids living in different states, and they're afraid to choose one of them over the other. Have y'all ever had a situation like that? I've got 3 situations like that right now with elderly parishioners who really need to go live with someone or near someone, but they don't want to show favoritism. An honest conversation there would be helpful. And then honest conversation in some cases with yourself. We all have limits of what we can handle and what we can bear. Just because it might be nice to be the full-time caregiver for your mom or your dad or your aunt or whatever, doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And so you have to have some honesty with yourself too about what you're capable of, how much time you have, how much energy you have, and the financial ramifications. If you're quitting a job to do it, for instance, or you're interrupting your career to do it. I mean, you have to have honesty with yourself as well. Yeah, I could just stop here. This is what keeps most families from doing this well. You know, it is. And it's why getting outside help can be really, really good. You know, a therapist can help you get to the bottom of the honesty with yourself, right? And family counseling, and even a pastor, a good pastor, can do this and can help in this case. You'd be surprised how many times I've had the kids and the parents both, you know, in my office or on my telephone, you know, talking to me about things that, guess what, they really need to talk to each other about. So that sounds like a simple rule, but it's not. In whatever situation you're dealing with, it's the place to start, right? Is honest conversation. And here's what goes with the honest conversation is set aside the guilt for a while. Set aside the guilt. Guilt about personal needs, guilt about being distant, not being as close as you want to be, guilt about not being able to do everything you can do. I had an elderly lady tell me this once. She lived alone and she had 3 kids and none of them lived in town. And she said, you know, I know they feel guilty that they're not here. She had a fall and you know, I was the one who showed up in the emergency room because they're, you know, along with a neighbor and 2 other people from the church because she's deeply loved by everybody. She was not alone, okay? But her kids felt so guilty because they weren't here. You know what she said to me? She said, they shouldn't feel guilty. This was my choice. This was my choice. I mean, I could have moved, but I chose to stay here. I wish that kids, I call us kids, right? That I wish that kids could be as easy on themselves as I think often these elderly people are, because they know they made the choice. And so guilt doesn't help. It doesn't help you make better decisions, right? And it really doesn't help the situation. And then my third simple little rule is there are plenty of experts to help. I am surprised, for instance, do this. How many of you have elderly parents who live out of town? Okay, quite a few of you. Okay, do you have the phone number to get in touch with 2 or 3 or 4 people who live very close to them? How about their pastor, if they're a churchgoer? Does their pastor have your name and number? I think that knowing what your resources are really important. And taking really good care of the people who are taking really good care of your parents is important. I don't think it's just because you're trying not to feel guilty. I think it really can help with the care of your parents and keep you more informed about what's going on. I'm going to let you guys ask some questions, but let me tell you a little bit about philosophy. I did this the last time I was with you, and I think that y'all found that more interesting than anything else. To do this well, whether you're the primary caregiver or you're simply a child watching this unfold from afar, there are a couple of things that I think are really important, and frankly, they're going to be important for you too as you age. because I hate to break it to you, as young and lovely as we all are, we're all going to age as well. Here's some things that really have helped me. Aging is not an enemy. It is not the enemy. Our society treats it as if it's the enemy, but aging is not the enemy. Guess what? It is the natural alternative to dying. It's supposed to be a good thing. It's actually supposed to be the normal thing. And I think the attitude we have about aging affects how we deal with our parents, and it's certainly going to affect the way we feel about ourselves. So diminished physical capacity, diminished kind of emotional, intellectual capacity. When you focus on the loss, when you focus on what's lost, it becomes a kind of an enemy. And I don't believe it is. I think it is a natural process. And with the right attitude, isn't it always about the attitude, friends? It really is. With the right attitude, there are really important lessons to be learned. I'm not going to preach a sermon. I could. But the truth is, the most important lesson that we have to learn in life, and I could back this up with scripture, just so y'all know, but I won't. One of the most important things we are here on this earth to learn to do is to let go and to be filled by God. I just believe that. So if you want to talk about that more, I'm happy to talk about that. But that is really an important task that every human being is supposed to kind of fulfill, to learn to let go. And you guys know, you've lived long enough that you've let go of lots of things over the years, I hope, right? You let go of self-judgment, I hope. Let go of guilt, maybe you've let go of some grudges and done some forgiving in your life. And the more you know how to do that, the richer life can be, because you've made room for good stuff to fill your life. Well, the aging process is really the same thing. It is a series of little losses that, in the best of all possible worlds, leaves an elderly people, and I'm telling you, I know many of them, I'm going to spend a lot of time visiting them, kind of a little more just who they were created to be. And I think about my father-in-law, who's just really, what's left of him is just kind of childlike wonder, appreciation, and dependency, frankly, which he always has been dependent. He just didn't know it. You're dependent. You just don't know it because you can do things for yourself. So I think there's an attitude shift that has to happen if you're going to be able to long-term take care of aging people. There's an acceptance of the process. It doesn't mean you don't fight to be healthy, right? Or to have healthy lifestyle, but to accept the process as something that is actually natural, and something that we can learn from. Which is why the second thing that helps me is to remain really, really curious. Really, really curious about their perspective. Many adult caregivers like us make a lot of assumptions about our elderly parents. We assume, because we've known them our whole lives, we assume what they think, what they like, how they feel, and we're busy, and we've got things to do, and we've got to take care of things for them. But if you move into your interactions with your elderly parents with more of a sense of curiosity, maybe there's stuff you don't know. Maybe something's going on that you can't understand. My father-in-law was telling me about Polly. He kept telling me about Polly. I wasn't really paying a lot of attention. Polly. And then one time he said to me, she held my hand at bridge. And it just opened up a whole new world for me. I got real curious for a little while. Nothing untoward, okay? Nothing like that. But I saw him as a man, you know, actually as a married man, because in his mind that was inappropriate, you know, because he's married, you know. And I didn't argue with him. I'm like, okay, tell me more about that. You know, it's like mom's been gone for a year and a half, but not for him, you know. And I never stopped to ask him, how are you doing with that? You know, or what if Polly wanted to be a little friend or something? You know, what a bizarre conversation to have with a 94-year-old father-in-law. But I went there because I'm like, I don't know, tell me more. And that's how I found out his tender little heart. I mean, that's when he told me all about how he talks to mom every morning and kisses her good night. And I looked, and you know, her picture is getting a little worn down, you know, beside the bed. But if I hadn't been curious, you know, that would have just been a offhanded comment. Because their social skills are declining. They're not going to think to tell you what happened to them today. I mean, you do have to be more curious and ask more questions. In particular, asking about pain, fear, and dying. And you know, that families don't like going there. But I want to encourage you sooner rather than later to see with curiosity if your parents want to talk about that. You know, my experience, now I know I'm a pastor, so maybe I walk into rooms with a different feel, but my experience is people are often waiting to talk about that kind of thing if you ask. And as the kids who may have to make decisions down the road, don't wait until you're the medical power of attorney and they have diminished capacity to ask those questions. Right? I'm sorry. Am I upset?
Yeah.
Okay.
Brings back memories.
Yes. And unfortunately, for some of us, it happens too fast, and you don't get that opportunity. But if you have the privilege of caregiving, and it's going on and on and on, then you also have time to do that. So curiosity, and you know, go where no one has dared to go before. It's okay. My parents are at the bottom. This is the first selfie they ever took. They had never done a selfie before. They are they're in their mid-80s. They're young. And this was actually the last time they got to travel to Colorado, to our Colorado house. And the last 5 years, I wouldn't let them go by themselves. I would go with them. I would drive up, leave them for 6 weeks, and then I would fly up and drive back because they still wanted to go, but they weren't capable. If I couldn't go, my son, who was a teacher and was off in the summer, would drive them up, and then I would go back up. And this was one of those trips, and it was actually the very last one. We didn't know it was going to be the last one, but it was. My parents had to move out of their home into a luxury senior living center where their meals could be provided and there was security. They don't need any other care, not right now. But the years are going on and mom's becoming less mobile and she depends on dad tremendously. And he had a fall just this month. And guess what that caused? We had to sit down and have some really honest conversations about, what's next, because this is only going to last for a little while. I go down every 3 weeks, drive down after work on Thursday, spend my day off on Friday, down there, check on them, handle things, and drive back. And I can do that, but you better bet I'm already talking to them saying, there's going to come a time when this isn't going to work. My mother said to me not long ago, I am worried that your sister will be jealous if I move to Austin. Isn't that interesting? I don't want to make my mother has always been, and many of you are like this too, I'm sure. She has to treat the two girls. There are only two of us, and she has to treat us equal, which I love. I mean, I love that about my mom. I gave up on that because I have 3 kids and I can't treat them equal. So I gave up on it. But my mother has always, this is a high value for her. And she literally would stay in Houston not to have to make one of us. And I don't have the thing to say, well, Mom, that might not be such a prize. My sister might not think that as a real prize. I won't say that. So I told my sister, this is where honesty comes out. I told my sister that this is what my mother. Now my sister and I, we cannot be more different, and she is no caregiver. Let me tell you, this girl is not. She is a vice president or a president of a bank. She's a high-powered, going, blowing, whatever. Now she calls Mom every day. She's a good daughter. I don't even call my mother every day. She's a good daughter, but she's a different kind of good daughter, right? And so I told my sister flew down to Houston and sat down with my parents. She said, listen, I think you need to go to Austin. But Dawn, I mean, that was vulnerable for Mom to tell me that. And she waited many years to tell me that. But that's going to help us when and if the time comes. Here's something else that helps me. When it gets tough, and there are times that it gets tough, okay? When it gets tough, as Mom, the caregiving for Mom as she was dying, and some of you've had to do this too, it was brutal. And it went on for months, and there were round-the-clock nursing care, and they wouldn't show up sometimes, and there were diaper changes, and I mean, everything you never thought you'd have to do. Well, like you, I did it, because that's what you do. And the thing that helped me as it was watching my children watch us do this. It was something I'd never really thought a lot about, but my children are getting older now. They're in their 30, 29, 31, 29, whatever. Because they started showing up also, and visiting and doing things that I wouldn't have necessarily anticipated young adults doing. And I'm watching them take mental notes and asking Alan and I questions, which is much easier in your 50s to talk about where you want to be buried and what you want to, healthy 50s, to go, yeah, we'll do cremation and we'll go, we'll do a columbarium. It'll be great, They are learning so much. And, y'all know once kids are out of the house, you're not sure how you're still going to teach them anything, right? This experience, as they are watching us with their grandparents, we are having very rich conversations about it, and I know it's making an impression on them. I don't know what they're planning for Al and I behind our backs. I do have a feeling the ones you saw up there they have a plan in place, but I just wanted to highlight that because that is a hidden thing that I think is happening here too. And then if you want me to get preachy, and I won't, but I really feel like as Christians, the people who try to live the Christian life, we have this phrase that we want to be more like Christ, right? I want to be more Christ-like. It sounds really good. I mean, doesn't it sound good? Well, if you want to be more Christ-like, the kind of serving, the kind of, putting your own needs aside sometimes for the sake of another, is exactly how it starts. And I put down Philippians 2 here, which is the famous passage where the Apostle Paul talks about emptying yourself and taking the form of a servant, have the same mind that Christ had. It didn't occur to me till we were about 5 years into this, that the most Christ-like, I'm a pastor for goodness sakes. You would think my life would be like totally Christ-like in every way. No, you wouldn't. But anyway, it's not. It's not. But guess where the one area, my marriage is one place where I have to be Christ-like if you're going to, take on the needs of someone else. But the second place, not so much with my kids as much as now these elderly relatives. That's a really important spiritual lesson. It's cold comfort when you're stressed out and guilty, I know, but I'm trying to give you the long view. That I look back on some of the things that have happened over these last 7 or 8 years. things that I had to do that I never would have believed I had the strength to do, things that decisions I needed to make. And some of you have had to do it, the life and death decisions, the DNR, the feeding tube, whatever it is. And to be able to just take the next step that you needed to take. And then later look back and say that I was able to lay down my own needs for a little while, not forever, but for a little while, and do the right thing. And it felt so good. It felt really good. Any of you have ever been to one of the funerals? Being the oldest pastor, I tend to do more of the funerals than anyone else at my church. I'm the funeral whisperer, I guess. But one of the things that I like to say to families who have done caregiving, whether they feel like they did a great job of it or not, is to say, you finished this race. You finished this race. You should stop and just feel good about finishing the race and hanging in there. Now if they didn't, I don't say it, but most of the time they're feeling ambivalent about it, and I'm saying as their pastor, no, I mean, yeah, it was hard, you might have made mistakes, but you didn't give up. You're still there. So that's important. A couple of cautions, and then I'll take your questions. There are family systems that are absolutely too broken to stay connected to. There are family systems that are abusive. There is family baggage that is sometimes so intense that some of what I'm talking about will not be possible. Honesty is not possible. Being in physical proximity is not possible. And so please do not hear me saying, no matter what, your parents are in need, you're going to run and go take care of them. It is not possible in some, and I pray that's not anyone's situation in this room, but I just need to say that out loud. We are not to line up for abuse. We're not to line up for, having to enter into a sick family system and be sickened ourselves. But those are extremes. But I needed to say that out loud. If you're thinking, well, is that my situation? That's where therapists can be very helpful. When you have to figure out what boundaries you can transgress and what boundaries you can't transgress. For instance, my parents, there are some boundaries I won't transgress. But I got a lot more baggage with my parents, right? Al's sweet parents who, I have a very uncomplicated relationship with. And so that was not as necessary. Does that make sense? To do this well, there may be there will be things from your past that you're going to need to forgive your parents for. Okay? And I'm going to say that to you not because it's easy, but because it's healthy for you. It's healthy for you. I mean, you need to do it anyway. You might as well do it while they're still alive. But you know what those things might be, and you can also get help for that. But if you have forgiven and can continue to try and forgive your parents, then the burden, and I'm using the B word, the burden of having to take care of them gets lighter, if that's how it feels. Okay? When people talk to me about the burden that they're feeling in caregiving, I almost in my mind automatically translate it to forgiveness. There is something tough that has happened that is hard to forgive. There may be other reasons too, but that's a big one. You also have to have some boundaries and take care of yourself to do this well. The whole airplane thing, right? You hear that all the time. And they tell you when that oxygen mask drops, you got to take care of yourself first. This is really important for parents as well. If they are safe, they're in an assisted living facility, a nursing home, there are other relatives taking care of them, then you also need to put boundaries and limit how much time and energy that you spend with them, okay? That sounds kind of, not real nice. I mean, I've told you how much I love my father-in-law. I mean, but we limit ourselves. We don't drop in every day. I could. He's just 5 minutes from the church. But it's a boundary. It's so that he feels he has autonomy, and it's so we don't get burned out. And my husband in particular, because it's more emotionally laden for him, he only goes twice a week. And I'm not saying that because he's doing the wrong thing, but it takes an emotional toll on him every time he visits his father. He misses his mom because he was a mama's boy, and mom's not there. And he hates seeing his dad diminished. It's hard, right? There's grief. And so his boundary is I'll go twice a week. And so that is healthy and that is good. And that is nothing to feel guilty about. The other caution really has to do with money. Everyone's situation is different. Care is getting more and more expensive. Rent in some of these assisted living facilities and senior living facilities is getting more and more expensive. I don't know, how this industry is going to go. But I do see more and more elderly people probably getting stuck in their homes because it's more affordable, And so one of the cautions that I have about this is many kids don't know their parents' financial situation, and you get to a place where they need to do something else, and then you find out that, the money isn't there. And so this is also something that you need to explore. It's a hard thing to talk about. Some parents don't want to talk about it because they think you just want their money or you're after their money, especially if their diminished mental capacity goes there. And some generations, I don't know how old some of your parents are, but there's a certain generation, especially those born in the 20s, who are just now, we're losing most of them, but I still visit people born in their 20s. They have weirdness about money, right? Because of, the depression and all that kind of stuff. And there are also facilities and caregivers who are not very scrupulous and will, take money. And so you need to be very, very careful about that. Let me also caution you about some legal realities. It's really important, earlier rather than later, to know who's handling the will, who's handling the medical power of attorney. If you're going to have a power of attorney and turn over everything, who that's going to be, who's going to manage, pay the bills, that kind of thing. And I want to caution you because, and I don't need to tell you this can become the major issue in some families, especially among siblings, right? So the sooner these conversations can happen, the better. Let me just end with this, and then I'll let y'all ask questions. I said at the beginning, I think attitude is what really matters. And I basically sent to Becky one piece of scripture that I thought might be the good one for us to be thinking about as we looked at this particular topic. And it's also from the letter to the Philippians. It's at the top of this page. It's the first thing that popped into my mind when I thought about my life caring for these exasperating, wonderful, lovable, exasperating older people. And Paul says, finally, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, what is commendable, if there's any excellence and if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Do what you've learned and received, and the God of peace will be with you. And the reason that popped to mind is I really do feel like I've entered this strange new world that I wasn't quite prepared for because it happened so suddenly. It happened with the stroke. And this whole new world of learning the legal ropes, learning about care facilities, different levels of care, Medicare, how to get reimbursed, you know, all just this huge host of things that I've had to, like Alice in Wonderland, you just enter, sometimes you enter fast, and it just kind of can be surprising. The attitude of no matter what, looking for something good or true or honorable or excellent. That means the caregiver in the facility who has the bright smile and is the one your parents, you know, respond the best to, you know, noticing that and kind of leaning into that. It means these funny little moments at the cardiologist's office, you know, remembering it and kind of treasuring it and pondering on it. It's you know, an hour and a half visit where everything's kind of, you know, you're in a hot room and there's not much going on, and nothing much is changing in their lives, but you're there because you're being a good daughter and there's nothing to say or do, but there you are. And in that moment, you know, one wonderful little memory gets shared, something you'd never heard before about when your husband, you know, and his sister were doing something as children. I mean, I practice this basically because it's what keeps me going, you know, because when you're looking and thinking about what's honorable and pure and true and just and commendable in this situation, you're going to see it. Now, there's some things you can try this and it's not going to work. I mean, there are a few things. But, you know, I could translate this to pretty much anything else in life. You know, you will see sometimes what you look for. And that's what the Apostle Paul taught me. And this is the one place in my life where it works very, very well. I've talked for a long time. What questions or comments? I know many of you have had as much, if not more, experience in this than I have. Yes, ma'am.